Welcome, everybody. We're going to be working on the solution in this video for the Module 3 assignment, the vacation planner. And let's take a look at what we're supposed to do here. So it says in this assignment, we're going to create an application that manages stops on a vacation. So we're going to do functions, practice conditions or if statements, basically, and utilize loops. Right. So one of the requirements here is that we create a function called getMenuOption. Should have no parameters. It should give the user the following options to add a stop, list current stops, clear all stops, and end the program. Now, if you guys remember, this is very similar to our last lab assignment, which I kind of built in a way that, kind of led you most of the way here. This function should return an integer with the menu option. The application should continue to ask the users for menu options until they select 4. The menu option should respectively do the following: append user input to a list of vacation stops. So you have to use a list to do that, and the append function. Print out each of the stops. If there's no stops in the list, a message should inform the user there are no stops, and the current list should be erased. So that would match up with these 3 entries. And here's a sample run of the program, right? And in an ideal world, you would try this a few times, right, to make sure that all the features work, and try to do things even to break it, right, to see, what happens if, I give it something that it's not expecting. Like, you start the program and just end it right away, right? Does that work? It should, right? But these are considerations you need to make. One of the weird things about, building software is there are people that, build the software, but there's also people professionally that test software, right? Like before it gets released, and spend their whole career taking stuff that other people build, either trying to break it or trying to make sure it works correctly, or maybe looking for a pathway through the software that wasn't considered, that, people are able to do stuff they're not supposed to. And that's a whole career. And another way to handle that, by the way, and this gets into more advanced programming styles, but basically we have what we call testing, aspects of software. So you write code that simulates a user running your software. So you're testing your software with code. That's kind of a weird thought, right? So you write code that tests code. That's also a career path, and people make entire careers of that. Another career path in programming, which I think is pretty fascinating, is people they don't even do any one of those tasks. They just document the software. They just go in there and say, let's make a user manual for this and explain how it works, right? And these are weird little niches that you don't even think about, but they're highly employable career paths, and some people make, sincerely, entire careers out of it, right? Because there's that kind of demand for it. All right, let's go ahead then, now that I'm done with my little soapbox speech, and I'm going to start with file management like I normally do. There's file manager comes up on the other screen. But I have a certain spot where I store my stuff, and I don't know if I pre-created a Module 3 assignment folder, but I did not. But that's my pattern. That's where I choose to put it. All right, so that's where my work's going to go. Back over in Visual Studio Code, I'm going to attach to that folder. And then I'm going to create a new file. And I'm going to call it mod3 assign.py. And, I would say alternately, you could call it vacation planner, whatever works for you is what you should name it. I name it this because when I go back, next time I teach this course, it'll be very clear to me which assignment it is. That's why I do it, rather than remembering the name of the program. I suppose if I was doing it professionally, I'd probably name it vacation planner or vacay plan or something like that. So keep that in mind. All right. First thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the instructions, and I hope you guys are kind of in the habit of doing this. So one thing that you could do, and I know some of us will do this or not do this, and I've noticed a few of you are in the habit of doing it. You can take all these instructions and just drop them right into your code and turn them into comments. That's a thing. but I'm just going to kind of take these tasks one at a time. And I think what I'm going to focus on is the get menu option. The other thing that I'm recognizing is the fact that we're going to have a list of vacation stops. All right. So my brain actually goes there first. I, and I don't know why I think like this. And I think when I do pseudocoding, and often when I do pseudocode assignments, I have people do like a recipe as their first pseudocode, like a food recipe. And like whenever you do a recipe, what do you think is the first thing on the recipe? It's the list of ingredients, which compared to a computer program would be the data resources that we need to make the program work. So I'm going to start actually by creating the data structure, and I'm just going to call it stops, and I'm creating an empty list, right? Empty square brackets. So now I have the spot in memory where all my vacation stops will get stored into that list. So data first. Then I'll start to define a function that they called get menu option, parentheses and a colon, and we're indented one line. And what we're going to put here is a display of the menu, and back over to the instructions again. This is the menu, right here. I mean, so in principle, I could kind of copy that and paste it in, right? So I could do that, but I do have it on my cheat sheet over here. The other thing that I'm noticing when they're doing this is a couple of things. First, there's a header, right? So this has got to be printed on the screen. All of the menu things are indented, so there's a escape sequence for a tab placed in there too, and then a prompt to grab the option, right? So that's what I'm shooting for right now. All right, so first things first. Yes, I'm doing this with copy paste just for speed and efficiency. I'm using the F-string format, even though I don't really need to here, but I'm doing a blank line, then saying vacation planner, and then I list each one of the menu options. Notice the escape sequence for a tab that indents it. All right. One last thing I have to add, and that is my input statement. And the user is going to be prompted to enter 1, 2, 3, or 4, right? So whatever they type at the keyboard, I want to convert that to an integer. And then because this is a function, I want that menu choice to be returned to the main program body. So I'm doing it in the form of a return statement. Right, so I'm going to return whatever the number they typed at the keyboard as an integer. So hopefully 1, 2, 3, or 4. Right, so that's the get menu option function. All right, let's take a look at the next set of instructions here. All right, so this part is complete. That's the way I see it. This function should return an integer with the menu option. Okay, well, we did that. The application should continue to ask users for menu options until they select 4. Now, if you remember how we handled this in the lab, I set up a while loop and I forced it to run the true, and then it would handle the menu display, and then it would run a series of if statements to decide which thing we're doing. So I'm going to do the same thing here. So that's kind of going to go at the bottom of my screen, basically. So I'm just going to do this while true. So basically I'm forcing the loop to run. When is the loop going to end? When the user decides, right? So this is a program that will continue to run until the user decides to opt out. I am going to create a variable called choice, and you could call it user choice or selection or whatever, but I'm calling it choice, that will run the get menu option function. So it's going to go up there, run the menu, put it up on the screen, grab the choice and send it back, and then store it in this variable. Could I have just put all this stuff here? Yeah, sure, you could have. But this is a lot cleaner, right? Especially think about it. If I had a menu that had 20 options on it, or little submenus or whatever. This is a cleaner way to do it. Now we go through the process of assigning the choice to the functions that it will drive. So for example, if the choice is equivalent to 1, what is it going to do? Well, it's going to add a stop to the menu. And I could write all the code for doing that right here. But instead, I'm going to opt to create a function to do that. So I'm going to call it add stop, and I'm going to call it right from here. Now, I realize I don't have it yet, so it's going to underline, but that's okay. I'm just going to build out the whole logic structure here first, and then I'll go back and create the functions. Then I will populate the functions. That's how my brain thinks. So that's how I'm proceeding, right? So I start from like the user interface, right? Like what the user sees, what their choices are, where it's going to send to, and then I'll give it the actual details it needs to work. The other option would be that if choice is equivalent to 2, what's that going to do? It's going to list the stops, right? So I'll call my function that list stops, parens, else if the choice is equivalent to 3. What's that one going to do? It's going to clear the stops. And then finally, we'll put in the break. All right, so think about this. Now we could, I think we had a little bit differently in the labs, but basically if they type 4 or anything else, they're out of the loop and the program is done. That's how I'm engineering it, right? I think when we did the lab, I think we allowed option 4 to break, and else was an error message. So I could do that too. So maybe you know what? Let's do that. So let's do Elif choice is equivalent to 4. We'll do the break there. That pops us out of the loop. Else, we'll just do a little message, and we'll give it a print. Parens, we'll do an F string here, and we'll say, well, let's do a blank line first, and then we'll say that was not a valid entry. And maybe you can give them even more and say enter 1, 2, 3, or 4. So I'm also thinking now, like, what happens if they do choose option 4 and break out? Well, the program's over. And so often what I do in those situations, and this is once again, we talked about this last time. I sometimes like to put, in a console program in particular, I like to put a message on the screen saying, hey, guess what? This is over. This is done. Go back to the C prompt, So that's me, right? But that's also a way for me to know that I'm out of the loop, right? So I would call that option. That's not a requirement, right? So now our task is to build these functions, and we'll just do them one at a time. So first, I'm just going to do my def statements, right, with the colons. So see how I'm trying to be like systematic about this? And this is what I would recommend. And yes, I know I still have underlines, but we'll deal with those one at a time. And then do you guys remember what the command is to have a function there, but not have it like throw errors? Yeah, you use the pass command, and that should get rid of all the underlining. Okay, so these are functions that do nothing right now. But that's a helpful little thing. But I have them in place. They're ready for code. Now I just have to worry about the logic. So from a problem solving or approach like completing a program, I don't know if you guys are catching what I'm doing here. I'm starting with the easiest possible things first. Putting a menu on the screen, easy. Coming up with something that was built on the lab, the same kind of menu choice, easy. So I just do the really easy stuff first, and then I worry about the complicated stuff. And then before you know it, you got a whole program, right? Because if you worry about the hardest parts first, then you don't go anywhere, right? If you take care of the easy stuff, then the hard stuff doesn't seem so hard afterwards, right? There's some sort of a life lesson in that too. I'm not sure what it is, but I think life operates a little bit like that too. All right, which of these functions, let's think about this. Which of these functions do you think would be the easiest one to write? All right, where I would start, Greg?
I would do the clear.
Yeah, totally. I would totally do the clear because I know that's a singular command, right? And that's exactly where my brain goes. All right, so how do we clear a list? We call the list, it's called stops, and there is a function called clear, right? And you just, that's it. That clears the list. I would also suggest, and this is, I'll say this is optional, is that you put in a message that it's cleared. And you know what? I'm thinking maybe like a blank line at the end would be good too. So they choose to clear it, they get a message saying it's cleared, and then they go back to the menu. Okay. I would say that the next easiest one is adding a stop. So that's where I would go next. So let's deal with that one. All right. So the way that this is going to work, and let's look at the example again. So if somebody chooses option 2, list the current stops, there are no stops. Okay. If they choose option 1 to add a stop, they'll get a prompt that says add a stop. You know, that maybe a good spot for are you sure? That was the question that came up in the chat. Um, you know, if you want to code that in, go for it. I wouldn't call that necessary, but right. Right. So like what Greg's hitting upon, and I would say that generally this is good user interface stuff, is like, okay, delete everything. Are you sure you want to delete everything? You know, it's not a bad question to ask. You know, are you double sure? You know, and if it was a more serious program, I would totally and completely do that. If you want to code that into yours, I'll leave it up to you. So all I'm going to do here is I'm just going to prompt the user. And I want you to notice here that I am putting a blank line at the beginning of it because that's kind of what they did in the example. Add a stop. And so they're going to type in, I don't know, Wisconsin Dells or New Orleans or something like that. That's going to get stored in a variable. And then once it's stored in the variable, we can then append it to our list. So we take stops and we can append user stop. So we capture it and then we append it to the end of our list. There is an optional approach, and some of you might see this and some of you might not, is you can skip the variable and you can take this input statement and just place it inside of here. That would work too. And a lot of experienced coders would go right to that technique. Because in reality, do we need to store that information? No, because think about it. We're grabbing it from the screen and we're putting it into a list anyhow. So we're already storing it. By putting it in a variable first, we're double storing it. Okay, so I'll just leave that there as a thought. Or maybe, you know what, let's put it in as a comment and we'll say alt, right? Something like this. Or you could just do this and put the input statement in place of the variable. And then with a little caveat, this eliminates the need to store the data twice. Okay, Caleb, I see you have your hand up. Question.
Yeah, good. Quick question on the clear stops function. I had just simply put print stops have been cleared. Is that stops.clear function necessary? Because if they choose option 3, it automatically prints that they've cleared it by choosing option 3. Isn't that the case or no?
Well, no, if there's stuff in there, it's still there. Right. So you have to actually remove it. It's kind of like the garbage doesn't get taken out until you walk it out to the trash can and the garbage man carries it away, you know? I'm not sure I'm understanding your question clearly otherwise.
Well, it's just without that stops.clear, when I ran the program, it gave the menu option and then did the list of stops and it listed this all the stops. And then when I hit three, which is the option to clear all stops, the program printed stops have been cleared. Um, Now that's not ending the program or anything like that, but it did serve the purpose in printing that statement. It didn't
But it's
clear
not
any
taking the
list.
garbage. You know, that my point is the stuff is still in the list. In fact, I'll tell you what, let's do this right now because we can run the program as it sits right now.
Mhm.
So let's just run it really quick and I'll show you what I mean. So, well, if I hit three, oops, sorry, wrong area. If I hit three, it'll tell me it's been cleared. Okay, I don't have a way to show the list right now. That's okay. So that's kind of a problem. But in order to clear it, I mean, if I type some stuff in here and I keep adding a stop, right? When I hit three here, it's actually cleared it. Now I can't prove that until I get the list thing running. But if you put stuff in and your clear function just puts a message on the screen, you're not really clearing it.
I see. I understand what you're saying. Yeah. Okay.
Alexis, you have a question as well.
Yeah. Um, I was just going to say like, well, especially because in the assignment itself, under the notes or hints or whatever, it said like just assign it like the empty array or whatever, or empty list, I guess is what we'd call it in here. So I was just gonna say maybe Caleb, that's what you did, and that's why I was coming back. Though someone in the chat also said if you tried doing number two, just to double check, kind of like what he was saying, if it did clear. But you would
Yeah, that's a good
accept.
point, right? So like one way I could clear the list also is just by doing this, just restructuring it again. This would make it empty as well. Yeah, so I think that's a good catch. Whoever dropped that in the chat.
Yeah, I guess part of my question though was like, um, so for instance, like mine's already submitted. I already submitted it this afternoon. I did not have a clear stops like method. I just did that directly in the choice three um Elif because to me it just seemed like really basic. But I did
It
have the
is.
methods for the add stops and the list stops, but like is that okay? Or should I
Yeah,
like
that's
fix that and
absolutely
submit?
fine.
Okay.
The key here, right? Like they didn't really specify that all the menu choices had to take you to a separate function. They didn't say that, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to show is that I think it's a generally good practice to do that because that way, like this while loop is really kind of steering the whole program. It makes it read very clearly. Certainly, I could just take this command, I mean, even the print statement, or this command and the print statement, and just put them in right here. It would work just the same. And it's
Yeah,
only
I
two
guess it
lines
would
of
also
code.
help. I guess it would also help in like bigger programs if you're like for instance, like with JavaScript, like you create components because you're going to use it in more than one place.
Yeah.
So I guess it's the same thing here.
You know, I mean, it's just kind of a logic thing. I mean, granted, we're writing stuff that's super simplistic, but if there were more steps that were happening, or you had more interaction with the user, or you started like doing what Greg suggested, which is like, are you sure you want to delete it? Right. And then if you take yes, then you actually go ahead and do it. That would make more sense then, right? Like in that clear stop. Yeah, totally. Right. But I think this is a great discussion that we're having, right? Because it shows you that you can do it either way and it still works. And I would still give you full credit for it because it works. It's a logical approach, right? But what I do find though is like whenever you have a menu driven program, it's not a bad idea to have the menu options call a function, which then drives it from there. I mean, that's just like when you do bigger build outs, it starts to make a whole lot more sense. All right, let's start doing the list. That's kind of the last little piece here that we need. So first thing we'll do is we'll just put a message on the screen that we're going to list the stops. And then let's think about it like this. If the list is empty, we should then print out the stops. If it's not, right, so if you see my syntax here, then we should put a message on the screen saying that you need to have some stops to list first, right? So that's a simple if else. So I would write that like this. I would say if the length of stops, so that's a list, if the length of that list is greater than 0, then I'll put all the stops. All right, so I'm just going to type pass in here for now, and I'm going to go to the else just to get the else out of the way because I think the else is easier, right? So this is me going for the low-hanging fruit first, right? And so I would basically do the same thing we did in the lab, give them a message saying, hey, you got to have something first. And then probably a wise thing is just to take them to the spot to add it. And I would call this optional here. But doesn't it make sense, right? Or would you guys, you could argue that point, right? So, if you want to, okay, user interface thing again, you could ask the user, would you like to add stops now? You could do that. Then yes, no, and if they say yes, then you can take them for that function. But that's just a matter of selection. Here inside the top part of the if statement, I want to output what is in the list of stops for each stop that's listed. And that sounds like a repetitive process. If I only have one, it would only have to happen once. But what if I have 20? What if I got a really busy agenda on my trip? So what I would do then is I would say for stop in stops, and I would use a for loop for this. Right? Here's the why. A for loop works automatically over a data structure. I don't have to worry about the range or the length or any of that stuff. I could program it that way, but it's not necessary. And then I'm just going to do a simple print statement. I'm just going to say print. We'll do a F string, and then let's tab in, because I think it's tabbed in on the screen. And then inside of curly brackets, stop. So a singular stop would be one item inside the list of stops. However many there are, 1, 10, 50, 1,000, it would work. So this is the whole program then. So let's kind of do a walkthrough here. This is the first 3 functions, the last function in the while loop at the bottom. And let's do a runtime on this. I'll try to put the list code up on the screen there for those still typing. All right, so let's try to run this. So let's go ahead and add a stop, and we'll say New Orleans. Let's list it. All right, let's clear it. Let's list it to make sure it's gone. And now it's asking me to add a stop. So I'll put that back in New Orleans. Let's add another stop. Memphis. Let's add another stop. Oh, I don't know. Give me a stop here, folks.
Chicago.
Chicago. All right, let's list them. Let's clear them. Let's type in a number that doesn't make sense. Let's type in a number that does make sense and exit. So it seems to me that it's all working. But there's certainly a lot of stuff you could add to this, right? But in terms of answering what is really being asked for, this is enough to accomplish it. Right. So if you get into the mode where you're working on one of these assignments, you want to totally build it out, make it really fancy, and handle every possible user scenario, I would encourage you to do that. I will also tell you it's not necessary at this point, but if you were writing a program for real, you probably would, right? So if you want to get in the habit of doing it, I'd say go for it. Otherwise, we'll call this the solution, and this video will end.